Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well and welcome to another video. Today we're talking about all the books I read in April, and good for me for not waiting to film this video until 3 months from now because we have 12 books to talk about today instead of 37 like last time. So it should go much quicker. April was interesting because I actually started expanding into reading other genres like the literary fiction, general fiction genre a lot more than I did in previous months. So I have a few books on this list from that genre. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I really love it. I did post a video already on this channel about reading literary fiction or just like general fiction books. And I did vlog 3 of them in that video. So go ahead and check that video out. But I did end up finding one top read in that genre that I really loved, and I'm so happy that I found it because it is a top read of the year. So we will get into all that in this video. So let's talk about the stats. For the month of April, like I said, I read 12 books, which totaled 4,515 pages. 3 of those books were fantasy, 5 were romance, 3 were general fiction or literary fiction, and 1 was a dark romance. Also, I had 8 books on the TBR for this month, and of those 8 books, I ended up reading 5. So that is a 63% completion rate, which I am not bad about. That's pretty good for me. The ones that were on the TBR that I didn't end up reading were Wild Love, Onyx Storm, and Archer's Voice. I just didn't get to them. So those are the stats, and let's get straight into it without any further ado. The first book I read in the month of April is Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe, and this is one that I vlogged. And this one was interesting because it follows this girl. So she basically has an affair with her professor. She's 19 years old and she gets pregnant, but he's married and he's got a family already of his own. So that's not great. And he wants nothing to do with her, but she is struggling financially because now all these bad luck things happen to her because now she's got this baby, and Margot also ends up losing her job because she can't find childcare and she can't show up. So there's that. She does not have very good luck when it comes to that. However, her dad comes through for her and then gives her this idea of how to make money, and that could be like her work from home hustle sort of thing. And she ends up being very successful with that. And it was very interesting. I really liked her perseverance. I did find it a little bit unrealistic when it came to all the unlucky things that happened to her, and also how lucky she was when it came to certain other aspects of this book. But it was still interesting. I liked the writing, and I liked that her dad came through for her and actually was a redeeming character. It was a little bit slow in the middle and I did get a little bit bored, but for the most part it did keep my attention, and it did move pretty quickly because the writing was written in a way to keep it moving relatively quickly. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars because overall it was pretty good. Okay. The next book I read was Ready or Not by Cara Bastone, and this I expected to like because everybody that has read this book has really loved it, and it's like a 5-star read for a lot of people. For me, it was not. It's another unplanned pregnancy trope. It follows the main character, Eve, and she has a one-night stand with this guy named Ethan, and she gets pregnant from that. And she basically tells him that she's keeping the baby. He's okay with it, but he is actually already dating somebody else. She also has this friend, her best friend Willa, who's been trying to get pregnant, and she's not very supportive of her because she has not been able to get pregnant. So there's kind of an envy kind of thing going on with her. And Willa's brother, Shep, actually ends up stepping in a little bit and kind of helping her out and doing things for her and being there for her. Shep was all right. He, as a character, little bit of a wet noodle. I wished he would have a little bit more of a backbone, but he came around towards the end. Ethan kind of triggered me throughout the entire book because it just felt like he just constantly had to be convinced of participating in anything, because even though he was a very willing participant the night that it happened, but then when their actions came to fruition, he was nowhere to be seen, and it was all about his feelings, and he's got this other girlfriend, and at that point it's just no, dude, you got to step up. I don't care about your feelings, you got to step up. And Eve was kind of just letting him make the decision whether or not he wants to be involved or not. That's one of the reasons why I don't like unplanned pregnancy tropes in books or reading about that, because of how men act in those situations and how it's usually just very unfair for the woman. So I don't love that. I didn't love how it was handled in this book. They did end up coming around to everything, coming around at the end. And Eve wasn't really standing up for herself too much either throughout the entire thing. She was just kind of being a martyr, and I'm not a fan of that at all. So I did feel a little bit triggered while reading this, and this one was another example of that. So I don't know. So it's just generally not my favorite trope, and this book ended up being another example of why it's not my favorite trope, and I ended up rating this one 3 stars. The next book I read was Bad Summer People by Emma Rosenblum, and this was another general fiction or literary fiction book. I'm not really sure which one this would be considered, but as I mentioned during my haul, this is like my favorite cover of all the books that I own. It's like just so beautiful. It's like perfect vibes. But this was also just okay. Another one of those books that are not a romance that I read this month. And this basically follows a group of very wealthy people who go and vacation on this island near New York. And it just basically follows all their drama. It's all this just like gossip and drama about like who's sleeping with who went broke, who got plastic surgery, who's, you know, having an affair with the tennis pro, stuff like that. Them just gossiping about each other. And not very much happens. It's mostly just like a character study of these people. And it was interesting enough. It read really quickly because it's third person and like very short sentences. So it made it move very quickly. And the book itself is very short. But I wasn't particularly invested in anybody except maybe like the tennis pro. He was pretty interesting to me. I was rooting for him throughout this entire thing because he's not like part of that like wealthy people group. He's just like working around them and dealing with them on a daily basis, I suppose. So I was rooting for him. He was a little bit morally gray as well. Like there was nobody in this book that was like actually like good. They're all kind of like shitty people in their own ways, but it was interesting enough. And I did actually enjoy my time reading this. Like it did lull a little bit in the middle, but there was a twist at the end, which surprised me because I wasn't expecting that. And I did really like the ending. So I ended up rating this one 3.25 stars. And I think I rounded down to 3 stars on Goodreads. Then the next book I read was One Star Romance by Laura Hankin. And this one I thought was going to be like a general fiction and not a romance, but it turns out that this is actually a romance, I think, because it does have a happy ending and there is quite a bit of romance in this book. This one follows the main character Natalie, and her best friend Gabby is getting married to this guy that Natalie doesn't really like very much. And Natalie is a new author and she writes her debut novel, and I think it's published, but it's not really doing all that well, and it's published during the time of that wedding. Now the male main character in this is Rob, and he's the best man and also the best friend of the guy that her best friend is marrying, essentially. So like they're the two best friends, maid of honor and best man, and they actually hit it off at first, but then he ends up reading her book and he gives her a bad review. He gives her like a 1-star review. Now her book hasn't been selling very well, so there's not a lot of reviews on her book. So most people who write reviews are like her friends and family, and they've been giving her like 5-star reviews. So she obviously gets upset when somebody writes a 1-star review, but he actually has a very good reason why he gives her a 1-star review. I think it's super valid, and it has to do with the couple that are getting married. So I thought that was going to go down differently than it did. I expected a lot more to happen when it came to that because it seemed like there was like a lot of setup for that, but once everything came out and like once they had the discussion, like it didn't really go down the same way that I had hoped it would go down. So the plot of this book is interesting and the romance in this is interesting. It does take place over the course of like 10 years or something like that, so it's like a very long plot line. The middle section of this book was a little bit lackluster, and I did find myself losing interest and like not really wanting to pick it up, but relatively interesting overall with like everything that was going on and the plot and everything like that. The characters were interesting. I definitely liked Rob, and I liked that he was honest with his review and like actually stood up for what he believed in by doing that, by actually like writing that review. And I did feel like everything did come to fruition towards the end, and all those unresolved feelings did get resolved towards the end. So that was good. I ended up rating this one also 3 stars. The next book I read was Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Monaghan, and this one was actually really surprising. I really like this one. So this follows Nora, who's a single mom of 2, and she's 39, and she's a screenwriter, and she writes a screenplay about her and her ex-husband's life, and it actually gets picked up for the movie, and then a Hollywood production crew comes to her house to actually film the movie there because she has like this beautiful home, and it's like just like picturesque, and it's just like described so beautifully and so perfectly. I really loved like the descriptive scenes of her home and like their life. But But when the movie is finished being filmed, the actor that plays her ex-husband, his name is Leo, he decides that he's just wanting to stay in the house for a few more days because he needs a break from his life, and he's also like grieving his mom passing away and stuff like that. So she decides to let him stay because he's also paying her and she's kind of like needs the money. And so she just kind of lets him stay in the guest house because he feels like her house is just like somewhere he can recuperate, and like the sun comes up there and it's like a really nice sentiment. So they obviously start having romance. It's a little bit insta-lovey, insta-lusty, but that's okay because like this book is just like such a page turner. He's really, really sweet like throughout the entire book, but then there's like this horrible miscommunication, and like for the longest time I really couldn't figure out what was going on. But then in hindsight, like you think about it and like the entire situation is like red flag, red flag, red flag. But it was still really, really interesting and like a page turner, and really pulled me in and grabbed me from the very, very beginning. And I really couldn't put this book down. I read it in one sitting, but it is relatively short. Like it's not a very long book. I really like her writing, the storytelling, and like everything that happened in this book was so interesting. And all the scenery was just atmospheric, and it was like an emotional roller coaster throughout this entire thing. I just had like such an interesting time reading this book. So I loved it. I ended up rating this one 4.25 stars. It wasn't a 5-star because of like the crazy miscommunication thing that happened, and it was a little bit insta-lovey and insta-lusty, but overall I had such a good time with this book. Then the next book I read was The Wedding People by Alison Espach, and this one I absolutely loved. It's another one that you'll see in that vlog that I posted about reading literary fiction, and this one is literary fiction because I did look that up. And this follows the main character Phoebe, who decides to end her life because she goes through a divorce. Her husband leaves her. A lot of bad things happen to her, and she doesn't really have anybody. She doesn't have a family. She doesn't have any friends, and she just decides that she wants to end it all. So she books this lovely vacation to this beautiful hotel. It's very expensive, but when she gets there, she learns that there's actually a huge wedding going on, and it's like $1 million wedding, and she runs into the bride in the elevator. Throughout that wedding week, her and Lila, who is the bride, have like these conversations, like these super honest conversations, because Phoebe feels like she can be honest for the first time in her life because she doesn't really have much else to live for, so why not? And she goes through this whole like self-discovery thing. It's very, very interesting. It's very different than anything else I've read. The only other concept that's kind of like this that I've read was Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood, which I also really, really loved. I love these kind of like existential meaning of life kind of books, like those kinds of topics and books, and I just love how this one was done. It's written really, really well. It definitely keeps your attention throughout the entire time. I really, really love this book. This was a 5-star read. Highly recommend if you have not read this yet. And like I said, this is a top read of the year for me. Okay. The next book I read was This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune, and this one was a little bit middle of the road for me. It follows two best friends, Lucy and Bridget. They both live in Toronto, and Bridget grew up in Prince Edward Island, and they were going to do a girls trip to Prince Edward Island, and it was just going to be the two of them. So there are 3 rules basically for this trip, and that is 1, to eat lots of oysters, 2 is to forget about the city, and 3 is to not fall in love with Bridget's brother Felix, or Wolf. So Bridget has this thing where she gives people these random nicknames. So usually when she talks about people, like they know them by their nicknames, not their real names. But essentially what happens is Lucy goes to Prince Edward Island, but Bridget is late because of an interview. So when Lucy goes to Prince Edward Island and she's by herself that first night, she ends up meeting this bartender guy, and they hook up because she knows him as Felix. So as you can imagine, that's not very good because that's one of the rules, so they keep that a secret. Then it skips to the future, and Bridget is getting married, and so she needs some time alone, or needs some time away from like the whole like wedding festivities and like the family and everything like that. So she escapes back to Prince Edward Island, and she just wants like her best friend Lucy and Felix there to like, you know, figure out her feelings on things. And so now there's like this tension because they see each other again, and they hadn't been together for a very long time. I didn't really care about this book. I didn't really care about these characters or their drama. It was a little bit annoying to me that like if you do find somebody that you love or fall in love with or have feelings for, that person would be off limits to you because they're like a sibling of a best friend. I don't really love that when it comes to books, or like that story trope. So that was a bit annoying. The plot was interesting enough to keep my attention and finish the book, but I just didn't find myself feeling those feelings feelings that this book was trying to evoke. So it was just okay, not amazing, not great, but just okay, and I ended up rating this one 3 stars. The next book I read was Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan, and this book follows the main character Ray, who is very sick with cancer. She's in the hospital, she's dying, she's going through chemo, and the prognosis is not very good. Her younger sister Alice is with her, and her sister have like this favorite fantasy series called Time of Iron, and her sister is like more of a fan of this fantasy series versus Ray, but she still knows enough to like remember and like the series and stuff. So she wakes up to this strange woman sitting by her bedside just out of nowhere, and it's not really explained as to like who this person is, but she makes her this deal that if she goes through the door and goes into the city, Ayam, which is the city from the book, goes in there and completes this mission of stealing this flower of life and death during the moment that it blooms. It only blooms like once a year or something. If she can steal it, she can wake up cured. If she can't steal it, she'll just die. So she takes the deal, goes into the story, and she wakes up as Lady Rahayela. She's also known as the Beauty Dipped in Blood, which is like this girl on the cover here, and how her dress is like dipped in blood. And so she has this mission, she's on this mission, she befriends her lady's maid and one of the guards and somehow convinces them to be evil with her and kind of like do her bidding and like be her minions and stuff like that. And she uses her knowledge of the book and the series to like get herself ahead. The writing is very beautiful. It has a lot of like descriptiveness to it, and it's very lyrical. However, it is not a fast read because of that. Like, it takes a little bit longer to digest what you're reading, which isn't normally my favorite, but the writing in this book was actually pretty. The other confusing thing about this book was like that all of the characters had like multiple names. So she's like Lady Rahayela, but she's also known as the goddess dipped in blood. And then Key, who's like the guard or like the male main character in this, he's also known as the villain of the cauldron. And Lord Marius Valerius is also known as the last hope. So there's just like a lot of characters that have these like random titles that like didn't really make much sense to me, and they're referred to as both throughout the entire book, and you just forget like who you're basically reading about because it gets really confusing with all those names and different titles and stuff. It's not very straightforward whatsoever. So this book felt kind of long to me. I did end up losing interest towards the end. I was very confused as to who the characters were at certain times, and the writing was not super easily digestible, but the concept of this is very interesting. I was really looking forward to reading this book because the concept seemed really fun. It was all just kind of a little bit too confusing for me, and it just kind of like dragged on a little bit too long. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars as well. The next book I read was Fantasma by Kylie Smith, and this is actually on my May TBR, I think it was, and I ended up reading it early, so I finished this in April, and this one was also just okay. This is a gothic adult fantasy, and it's supposed to be kind of similar to Caraval. If you've read Caraval, obviously Caraval is young adult. This is supposed to be an adult one, but this follows the main character Ophelia, who is a necromancer, and she has a younger sister Genevieve, and their mom dies. So they are from a line of necromancers, and when her mom dies, Ophelia ends up having to be the one to carry on the family line of like that magic, and they end up learning that their mom took on some loans for their house, and their house is going to get repossessed within 30 days if they don't pay back those loans. Now there is like this yearly competition that goes on, which is called Fantasma, and it's in this house, like this gothic house, and Genevieve decides to go into Fantasma to win it and basically earn the money to pay back their debt. Now Ophelia goes after her. She finds out that she went, and she goes after her to try to stop her, and then she herself has to enter this competition. While she's there, she ends up meeting this ghost. It's like he's a phantom, but he's like a very powerful phantom, and they make a blood pact to kind of like help each other. It's pretty interesting. I like the gothic vibes, but there's a lot of plot holes in this book as well, because like there was like this part that I was wondering about, specifically with the red roses. It was described as like something where like if you have red roses on your porch or something like that, evil beings can't come through the door, and it was like mentioned once and then it was like never mentioned again. And there's also like red roses on the cover, so I was really wondering about that. Like that wasn't explained, but maybe it will be explained in the second book, I don't know, or like brought back in the second book, because there is another book following Genevieve, believe. So I do have questions about that. I did wish to see a little bit more of her being like a necromancer and like doing like the things that she needs to do for that. It was just kind of like mentioned, but it never really went into depth about that. So that was something that I wanted to see more of, but other than that, it was okay. It was interesting enough to like keep my attention. I did like the gothic vibes. I did like the haunting scenes. There's like quite a few haunting scenes in here that were a little bit spooky and creepy, and I did like that aspect of it. The chemistry between the two main characters was really good, but it definitely started a little bit too quickly, I think, in my opinion. It was good tension in the beginning, but then they kind of like got right into it, which is fine, but it's just not my favorite. I like to have a little bit more tension, a little bit more yearning in the beginning, and like a little bit more of like a build up. But it was still all right. Their chemistry was pretty good in this book. There were a lot of like twists and turns that I wasn't expecting in this book, and it was definitely better than Caraval in my opinion. Caraval felt a little too descriptive of like the rooms and the dresses and like, you know, the parties and stuff like that, whereas this didn't really do that as much. So I like that. If you're looking for like a fun, easy time, I would recommend this. This isn't like one of those fantasies that like you will need a palate cleanser after. I would actually consider this as like a palate cleanser if you're looking for one in like the fantasy genre or romantasy genre. This would probably be it, because it's like just like easy, doesn't really require much thought. There's not really any world building or anything like that, so it's just like an overall fun, fast read, and there's really not that much to it. So I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars and rounded down to 3 stars on Goodreads. Then the next book I read was Gothicana by Runix, and this one was really, really good. This is so gothic, so spooky, so creepy. The vibes in this are immaculate. I can't believe I waited this long to read this book, because I've had this book for like, I think maybe since 2023 or early 2024 or something, and I've been waiting to read this, and I just read it now, and it's not even the fall. This has like absolute perfect spooky vibes. Highly recommend reading this in the fall or around Halloween. It follows the main character, Corvina, who goes to this school, and she's a little bit weird because she's been homeschooled. She's got like this black hair and these purple eyes, and her mom is also a little creepy because they both kind of like hear voices, and they have voices in their heads telling them to do things, and she's just overall just kind of got like these like creepy vibes about her. So now she's going to the school, Varenmore, where she's going to be a student, and one of the very strict rules that that school has is that there can absolutely under no circumstances be any relationships between like professors and students. Well, there's this one guy, he's actually a grad student, but he's also teaching classes, and she catches his eye, and obviously that develops into like a secret romance. I thought this was really, really good. Just like all the things that were happening in this book, like people going missing, I really couldn't figure it out. Just the feelings that it evoked while you read this is just so good. And the descriptiveness, Runix just has like this way with words where it just makes it feel so magical. I had theories going into it. Like as I was reading, I had all these theories about like who he is and like what's gonna happen, but I was wrong with everything. It was actually kind of funny how wrong I was with everything. I didn't love the whole like madness thing. If you've read this book, you'll know what I'm talking about, but there's like this whole like madness thing and like a nickname that he gives her, which I didn't love. I found that kind of weird. I didn't like it, but outside of that, I liked everything else about this book. I liked their chemistry. I also liked how she was like so in tune with her own feelings, and she trusted her gut and like her instincts and everything. That was probably one of my favorite parts about this book, but overall the vibes of this, so good. Highly recommend, and I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. The next book I read was Promise Me Sunshine by Cara Bastone, and this one follows Lenny and Miles. And Lenny had a best friend, and she died of cancer, and they were like so close, and her best friend knew that she would have a hard time moving on. She's going through grief, and she's like really not handling it well at all whatsoever, and her friend made her like this like how to live again list, like this checklist of things for her to do to rediscover her love and like passion for living. Lenny is a babysitter, and she takes on this like temporary gig to watch this kid, but she ends up meeting the kid's uncle, who's actually living upstairs or downstairs somewhere in the building, and he learns that she is going through grief, and he wants to help her out a little bit if she can kind of like teach him how to be better with kids. So that's their agreement. She's going to teach him how to be better with kids and how to like get the niece to kind of like him a little bit more, and he's going to help her complete those things on that that checklist. This is super sad. There's just so many like grief moments in this. It's like super oversaturated with those grief moments, and I felt like it would have maybe had more of an impact if it wasn't so oversaturated with those grief moments, because it was just like a lot, like one after the other, and I just felt myself like not really feeling connected and not really feeling what I was supposed to be feeling with this book. This one actually took me quite a few days to finish. I think it was like 5 days to finish this book, because I kept putting it down and not wanting to pick it back up, just because it like takes a toll on you as you read it. I did like the characters. I did like their chemistry and like their friendship and everything and how that developed, because she was pretty relatable and Miles was really sweet, and yes, he was a little bit awkward, but he does come through with a lot of things for her and just like very golden retriever in a way. They did have good chemistry. They did have a good friendship, and I did like them as characters. It just felt so oversaturated with the grief that like I just kept losing interest in the book. So this is another one that I rated 3 stars. It was good overall, but just kind of dragged on a little bit too long in my opinion. And then the final book that I read in April was Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree, this is actually the prequel to Legends and Lattes, but it was published after Legends and Lattes, and you should read it after as like the second book, because in the last chapter it does have spoilers for Legends and Lattes. So if you want to kind of like enjoy it in the best possible way, I would read it in publication order and read Legends and Lattes first and then go back to the prequel. And this basically goes back to Viv and her life before she went to that town to open the coffee shop. So here she's just like a mercenary, and she gets injured while trying to actually hunt down a necromancer, and she has to stay in this one town until she recovers. The town is very boring, very sleepy, not very much action is happening there, not much is going on. So in order to entertain herself, she ends up stumbling upon like this bookshop, and the bookshop owner Fern, who has a little pet right here. He's like a griffin, and his name is Pot Roast, which is super cute. She ends up recommending a book for her, and Viv ends up kind of like rediscovering or just discovering her love for reading for the first time. So it has really good vibes. She's reading books that she's really enjoying and like getting immersed in those books, and she's reading at a cafe and like stuff like that. And obviously this is a cozy fantasy, so there's like no action going on. It's just like low stakes. It's just cozy, atmospheric, and not very much is going on. Very similar to Legends and Lattes in the sense of like the friendships that she makes and the found family aspect of it. All of that is like very similar, and it kind of evokes all those same feelings where you just want to like cozy up with a blanket in front of like a fireplace and just like read this book. So I had a really good time with this one. I do love cozy fantasies, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. So these are all the books I read in the month of April. I would say it was kind of like a mediocre reading month for me. I did really love The Wedding People, and I enjoyed Fantasma and Gothicana and Bookshops and Bone Dust, but the rest of the books, oh, and Nora goes off script, but the rest of the books were kind of mediocre for me. I would say kind of middle of the road. So I wouldn't say it's the best reading month, but I would say it's okay. Let me put these down. So that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were, so we could talk about books. As always, all my links are down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.